Hello, this is Susan Hayes, the Positive Economist, and today I'm going to go through another of our videos in the series of InvestingInYouth.com, Introducing Wall Street to the Classroom. I'm going to discuss the importance of a strategy today. Why bother with the strategy? Well, every time you sit into your car and you want to go somewhere, you don't just start driving and end up at some location. Instead, you always have a plan. And a plan basically consists of, well, where am I now? Where do I want to go? How am I going to get there, and what are my chances of success? So if I want to drive from Cork to Dublin, I'm in Cork and I want to go to Dublin. I'm going to drive to get there, and my chances of success are very high because I have my car and it's full of petrol, and in addition I know where I want to go and I know the road to get there. Now that's a plan. Now what I'm going to do is give you some statements of people who didn't have a plan and who didn't have a strategy, and we'll consider the consequences. Let's take Jack Hackett, who was out on a Friday night and was talking to a few mates. One of them said he had a red hot tip. He'd heard from a friend of a cousin of a stranger who overheard a conversation at the bus stop, and he immediately bought 10,000 shares on Monday at 5 cents. Now what do you think he did wrong? Think about it. Mrs. Doyle, while having some tea, went on the internet and found a numerology website which proclaimed to have great stock market strategies. One such example was to buy the top 5 stocks of an American index at 8 p.m. on the night of a full moon and to sell them at the spring equinox at 2:45 p.m. She thought it was worth a try. Now what did she do wrong? Think about it. Dougal Maguire has a big interest in the stock market and has done a number of courses on how to profit from it. He buys a book in Morocco that promised anybody can make 50% growth in a year, but it requires a lump sum of €50,000 to start, 50 hours a week of research and an accounting degree. He buys the book thinking it can't be that hard and he'll manage it all right. And Ted Crilly, he works in the IT sector and knows his industry very well. He does a lot of research to find some highly undervalued stocks. He buys them, leaves them alone, and he looks back in 7 years' time and finds that they have doubled, but had been at 500% after 2 years. Now, each of these people didn't have a strategy. What do you think of these decisions, and would you have done the same? And what do you think the likely outcome of these scenarios would be? What could you advise these people to do instead? Well, what I think is, first of all, Jack Hackett had no idea why that person at the bus stop felt the hot stock was a good buy. He simply bought on a rumour, and I don't think that that's very advisable. You should always know why you're buying a stock. There should be some very concrete reasons as to the first time and every single time that you buy a stock. He only bought one stock and didn't spread his risk or diversify at all, which is a very, very dangerous thing to do in the stock market, as anything can happen one stock, but at least you're minimising your risk by having more than one. He didn't look into the stock at all himself or get a knowledgeable opinion, so again he had absolutely no basis for buying. And finally, he didn't have a plan as to when to sell. This decision is every bit as important as why you buy a stock. And let's take Mrs. Doyle. Well, in her case, the strategy she found was on an internet site and was not time tested. She didn't check the credibility of the author. It could be somebody simply having the crack. And Dougal Maguire, well, he knows an awful lot about the stock market. How did he go wrong? Well, he wasn't willing to give the research the time in order to follow the strategy, which was time intensive. He didn't have an easy to follow strategy, and he wasn't willing to give the strategy that he did find the actual requirements of what it needed. Also, he didn't have the skill set to be able to replicate the strategy, which was clearly not easy to follow. And I would predict, although it's not often that I do, that he would be very, very unlikely to follow that strategy through if it took that amount of time and that skill set. You are much better off going down the line of an easy to follow strategy. And Ted Crilly, whose shares had doubled, surely that is okay. Well, he didn't have a plan as to when to sell the shares. Maybe he should have sold them the 2 years before when they were 500% higher. That is the question, again, that I always say. You have to know what to buy, but also, just as importantly, when to sell. So the characteristics that a strategy should have would be, first of all, is that it's easy to follow. It should be very easy to understand and take relatively little time to implement. It should be time tested. Although the past is not an ideal predictor of the future, it is better than having nothing at all. It has to make sense. If it is just gobbledygook, it's unlikely to work, but usually having it time tested and easy to follow would automatically confirm this point anyway. You have to understand why you're buying and you have to know when and why you will sell. For every single stock that I personally buy and that I hold, I know why I'm holding it, and I know when I will sell it, and I will have a reason to sell it. That is of utmost importance. And finally, it's important to diversify, to have a number of stocks. This minimises your risk as opposed to having just one or two stocks and hoping for the best. And there is often a debate that people have, and that is the stock market is just for gamblers. In some cases, yes, I agree. The stock market can be for gamblers. But on the other hand, for people who are investors as opposed to speculators, like we discussed in an earlier video, I think the stock market can be for investors, absolutely, who do make money out of it. After all, would the industry be as big if it wasn't? This is Susan Hayes, the Positive Economist.